My name is Harold Hosack, and I'm going to tell you about a fly that I call the standing zonker. I recently developed this fly to fish for bass and sunfish in the lakes and ponds around North Texas, but I think that it's applicable to lots of other situations and other locations. The nice thing about the standing zonker is it's easy to tie, it's easy to fish, it has some unique performance advantages that I'll talk to you about. And the particular concept that is used in this is, I think, applicable to many other flies and many other situations. So I'm glad to be able to tell you about it. The basic concept used in the standing zonker is to add a small amount of buoyant material to either the shank or the bend of the hook, so that when the sinking lure goes to the bottom, rather than lying flat on the bottom, the hook and bend actually stand up. You can see this in this sample that I have. There's 3 different colors of standing zonkers here. This simple addition of buoyancy has several advantages. From the fish's standpoint, of course, having it standing up gives it additional visibility. That's particularly good in areas where there's weeds or moss on the bottom. If you pull this along slowly, it appears as a bug that's going along and digging up things out of the bottom to eat. If you pull it a little bit faster, when you pull it, it'll bend down and scoot along the bottom sort of like a leech. When you stop, it'll stand back up and wave around a little bit. And when you let it stand still, if there's just a little bit of water motion from current or whatever, the rabbit zonker is very flimsy and it will float around and look tantalizing to the fish. From the fisherman's standpoint, of course, having the hook up off the bottom means it's less likely to catch in the weeds or rocks or things like that are on the bottom. And the fact that you're actually balancing the buoyancy of the hook, or the buoyancy of the lure, and the sinking of the lure by the buoyant material and the hook and whatever you have that's causing the lure to sink normally, you can actually adjust the sink rate. And there have been several situations where people have talked about the effect of sink rate on their ability to catch fish. So let me go ahead and show you how to tie this lure. These are the materials that we're going to use to tie this basic standing zonker. There's actually a lot of latitude that in what you use, but in my case I typically use a number 4 or number 6 TMC 5263 hook. There's a gold bead and it's 5/32 of an inch brass. There's a piece of sticky back foam. It's 2 millimeters thick. It's 1 inch long and 1/8 of an inch wide. You can cut this with a pair of scissors if you'd like. I typically cut it with a River Roads Creation number 8 stonefly wing cutter, and that gives me a piece that has a nice taper to it. There's a rabbit zonker that the leather is 1 3/4 inches long and the zonker is 1/8 of an inch wide. As we make this fly, we'll be sticking the foam to the rabbit zonker. So if you don't use a sticky back foam, you need super glue or something to put those together. The thread is really not critical, but it will be used to tie the combination of the foam and the zonker to the hook, and you'll need to tie it tight enough to compress those and hold them still. Okay, I'm going to show you how to tie the simplest standing zonker. I'll tie this on a number 6 hook, but you could equally well use a number 4 hook with the 1 3/4 inch zonker, or you can adjust the hook size and zonker length for your application. I'm using sticky back foam, and I've actually attached the sticky back foam to the rabbit zonker here. As you can see, the foam is attached about 1/16 of an inch behind the end of the rabbit zonker, and after I attached the foam to the rabbit zonker, I turned it over and I trimmed the fur off of about the first 1/8 of an inch of the rabbit zonker, because I'm going to be tying thread over that in the end. So now that we've got the foam and the rabbit zonker stuck together, we need to squash the barb on the hook, then put the bead on the hook and put the hook in the vise. And now what we'd like to do is to wrap a layer of thread down the shank of the hook all the way to the all the way to the point. So we'll just wrap the thread down the shank of the hook till we come to the point. And we'll wrap it just past the point of the hook. Okay. Now what we're going to do is to put the rabbit zonker and foam on top of this, and the way we'd like to do it is so that in the end, when we get this all tied down, we'd like for the rabbit zonker to be just behind the bead head. So what we have to do is we have to separate the fur on the rabbit zonker just above where our thread is, because we're going to wrap the thread around that. We'd like to separate the fur right down to the leather. There's different ways to do that. One way that I have found seems to work well for me is to moisten the fur a little bit, and then take my bodkin and slip it along the leather all the way through, and then just lift up, and that allows you to fold the fur back right down to the leather. Once you get that folded back, bring your thread up. I'm going to make 2 wraps here and then stop and talk to you for just a minute. I've made 2 wraps around there, and I can go ahead and put a couple more wraps around here and then continue tying the fly towards the front. The only problem is it's a little bit of a problem because the foam and rabbit zonker tend to slip around the hook sometimes. So what you can do is here at this second twist, you can lift up the foam, and instead of going down around the hook, you can go down and under the foam. And what that does is that makes a loop that's right around the foam that when you pull it, it pulls towards me right now. If I now go back under the hook, under the foam, push my rabbit fur back down to where it was, and go back around the rabbit zonker. Now what I've done is I've made another loop that if I pull it, it pulls in the opposite direction to the first one. So those two, if I go back around the rabbit zonker again, pull that down, I've got 2 interlocking loops that tend to minimize the ability of the rabbit zonker and foam to move around the hook. So now to continue, we need to pull the rabbit zonker and foam up, make some loose loops up to about halfway between the bead head and the point of the hook. Put this down, use my bodkin again to slip along the foam, separate the fur. Put about 4 wraps of thread around that. Lift the foam and rabbit zonker. Put some loose wraps up to about 1/8 of an inch behind the bead head. Bring the rabbit zonker and foam down. Bring the thread around it. Catch the end of that and just tie it down. And there you're essentially finished. The only thing we need to do to complete this is to put a couple of whip finishes on it. And there you're done. That's the basic standing zonker. Now, if you'd like to, you can always add things to it. You can always add some flash in on the bottom of this fly. If you wanted to, you could have used cross-cut zonker and had the tail. You still need the foam, but if you had the cross-cut zonker, you could have wrapped the cross-cut zonker around the shaft of the hook to make a fancier collar for the fly. And if your fishing location needs it, you can add a weed guard. There's many things that you could do. You can make it certainly in many different colors, and you can make it with many different things. but this is the basic fly. I should make a couple of comments here about the approach of adding this highly buoyant material to make the lure stand up. First, while I haven't seen anyone else describe this approach, I can't claim it's unique because fly fishers do a lot of different things in fly tying, and I don't know what all of our fly fishing forefathers might have tried. Second thing is that the basic approach is to balance the buoyant force and the sinking force appropriately so the fly stands up. And while I've done this by adding the highly buoyant foam, it's possible to choose the hook and the bead head and the rabbit zonker length so that when you put it together without the foam, it'll actually stand up. As a general rule, though, the problem with doing it this way is that it often puts severe restrictions on the dimensions or the appearance of the lure that you're making. And adding the highly buoyant material like the foam really gives the fly designer a lot more latitude to get the appearance that they want while still making sure the fly stands up. Okay, so now that we've made a standing zonker, let's put it in some water and see what it looks like. I have my vase of water here, and I'll drop the standing zonker in the water. Okay. As you may or may not have expected, when we first put it in the water, you see it doesn't sink immediately. This is because the rabbit fur holds air very well, and it's causing it to float. So I'll push it down and swish it around a little bit to get it good and wet. When you actually fish with this lure, when you first cast it out, it'll float like it just did. And if you make a couple of strips, the lure will go underwater. And depending on what type of tippet you have, it'll sink faster or slower. I think most of you know that monofilament tippet is about 15% denser than water, so it sinks fairly slowly, and it won't make a big difference in the sink rate of this lure. On the other hand, fluorocarbon is about 75% denser than water, so it sinks fairly quickly. So if you use a fluorocarbon tippet on this, it may significantly affect the sink rate of this lure. A key question to be answered when you use this highly buoyant material like foam is how much do you need to make this thing stand up? You can actually answer that question analytically if you want to, but it's much easier if you just have a piece of foam and a hook and the bead that you want to try to just put the bead on the hook, put the hook on the foam, and drop it in a glass of water. And if it stands up like this one does here, you can see it's standing up, it'll probably work. And if it doesn't work, you can easily just add a little bit more foam, or if it's too much foam and it floats, you can just cut some of the foam off to get a prescription that'll work for you. One other thing that I might say about this lure is that if you pick it up and drop it, you can see that it sinks quite slowly. This means that it's not too far from neutral buoyancy itself. This is usually quite good. It not only gives the fish a long time to see it and maybe catch it on the way down, but also it allows you to fish it if you so choose as a very effective streamer. In fact, it's not infrequent to find that a bass will follow the lure a good ways as it's moving along the bottom and continue to come up to it and let it get away. But at the end of the retrieve, when you start to pick it up off the bottom, that fluttering of the rabbit zonker causes them to come up and grab it, apparently thinking it's about to get away. Okay, that's the standing zonker. I hope that the discussion and the information has been useful to you. Most importantly is that these appearances are things that you can see and decide on by taking the lures that you make and dropping them in a glass of water. So this gives you a whole new set of parameters to adjust in trying to fool the fish. Good luck in your fishing. I hope it works as well for you as it has for me.
Come on, take down your fishing pole and meet me at the fishing hole. I can't think of a better way to pass the time of day.